Hello, everybody. So, I've been trying to figure out what's the best method for this type of platform and the classroom and for it to work. So, what I think is best is that I'm going to be giving you guys sort of like the class notes of what I would have done in class so that we spend more time in the classroom, like having a conversation. And then picking some parts of the reading so then you could fill out the study guide. I think that will work best. So you're going to take like class notes separate in your notebook, and then I think that information can be thrown into the study guide and we'll kind of see how that works out. Okay, but I think this is the best thing, at least for this unit, and then we could work on the other units as we go because a lot of times this unit, really the research is a lot of lecture, so that in order for us to really practice what we're seeing of lecturing, then it's best to do the lectures at home, and then for the classroom we could do more activities and kind of review the concepts as we go. Okay, so this will kind of be brief. What I do want you to do is on a separate sheet of paper, like after your study guide, your next thing should be like class notes. Just put class notes, and then intro to research will be your topic. Okay, and then we'll do the same thing of I'll tell you what's the subtopic, and then the notes you're going to write for each bullet. Okay, and then the good thing here is that you guys will be able to pause, slow down, or speed up the lecture so that you could write down the information, whatever's, whatever works for you. Okay, and this is going to have probably a lot of mistakes as we go, just because I'm trying to figure this out. So we are going to figure this out together. And this is what trying something new looks like, right? It's not going to be perfect. It will be tweaked, I'm sure, as we go and we learn and I get feedback from you guys. So this is going to be a nice experience for us both so that you see what it looks like when somebody's being brave enough to try something new. And let's see how it goes. All right. So, anyway, so the first thing we're going to kind of talk about is exactly this intro to research in psychology. I'm actually going to give you this worksheet in the classroom, and we'll talk a little bit more in depth when we get into class. But this is pretty much the process of what starts happening in psychology, like for research. It kind of starts with this whole curiosity, right? Like you look around the world and you start questioning and like, hey, is there something that they kind of mesh together? Okay, and there is a process. But a lot of people always question psychology and like, hey, psychology is just this thing out there, right? It's really no research or it's not really science. But in actuality, there is a lot of science and research behind psychology. And the reason why we know this is because one, they have to use the scientific method. Okay, sorry, I'm trying to figure out this little clickety click thing. Okay, so first thing I want you to do is your first subtopic is going to be scientific method. So you put like a little star next to the margin and then write scientific method, and then your notes are going to be bullet format. Now, like I said, mentioned in class, when you see a PowerPoint up, it really is some just decoration and kind of a guideline for you guys and me, but don't write what's on there. Okay, this is very much like a textbook. It's not going to make any sense. You're not going to want to go right back to it. Okay, so first thing you're going to put on there is that in psychology they must use scientific method. Okay, that's going to be your first bullet, is that they must use scientific method in order to basically, collect data, test their hypothesis, and see if it's true or not true. Okay, they can't just be like, hey, this is, if you have more, I don't know, let's say chocolate, you're going to be smarter, right? They just can't make any claim. So they use what's called the empirical investigation or empirical process method, which is just what you guys have always learned, is this 5 steps or the scientific method, which they use the hypothesis, the procedures, the data, and then the conclusion, right? Okay, so that's basically it for scientific method. They use the empirical method, which are the 5 steps, okay? And it's basically in order to avoid any type of biases or making sure that they're collecting the proper data. Excuse me. Now, staying under the scientific method, the next little bullet will be hypothesis. And as you guys know, and you're more than welcome to use this definition that is on the PowerPoint, which is basically a testable prediction that lets us either accept, reject, or revise a theory, okay? As well as kind of creating a new theory when we have these hypotheses, okay? Now, what does that exactly mean? So hypotheses, they must be testable. That's the first thing. So under hypothesis, where you wrote this definition, kind of do like an indented little bullet, and then because you're gonna write more information about hypothesis, and this is basically that it must be testable, and it also must mention the outcome of the study, right? So it's usually like, how am I going to test it? What am I testing? And then this is what I believe the outcome is going to be. Under hypothesis, also write in that bullet, if that, comma, then, right? So we're going to look at some research out there. And let's say if you give children candy, then they'll be hyper. Okay, and that was actually one of the writings. They asked for the hypothesis, right? What is the hypothesis? You're going to have to be able to know the if and then. All right. And literally, what they're testing is they're trying to create either a theory or test a theory that's out there already. Now, next thing is basically a theory. So, a theory is not a law, right? And in psychology, all you pretty much will see are theories. There are going to be very, very few laws in psych that we cover, but for the most part, they're theories, which is basically it's an explanation, right, of explanation of behaviors or events. So I want you to write that down as your, this is still going to be under scientific method. It's your next little bullet, which is theory. And then theory is it explains behaviors or events by giving ideas that organize what has been observed. Okay, so that's actually the one that I want you to write the definition, which is it explains behaviors or events by giving ideas that basically organize what has been observed. It's kind of like a prediction, of what will happen in those the behavior or events. Okay, now with a theory, one of the key words I want you to put here is this idea of this falsifiable, right? So under theory, please write falsifiable, which is basically that the possibility, like it's telling you that there is a possibility that it can be false by an observation, and it's so a possibility of an assertion that can be shown false by an observation or experiment. So basically, for falsifiable, it if it is false, then this can be shown through observation or experiment. So they're basically showing, they're proving like either if it's false or if it's not. Okay. Now, don't need to know much about that after all. And now the next thing you are going to cover. Now, this is just to explain a little bit more of how researchers, what they do is if they want to observe, right, the physiological response to fear, right? I need to collect data. How am I going to do that? How am I going to know if someone is scared, right? If there's fear. And this is a great little video somewhere. I don't know where it is right now, but they do this often. It's like a little scare house, and they have the video, and you see people they get people's reactions anyway. But here, if you look here, it's basically that they are going to, and I'm not sure why this thing is doing this, and it's trying to crazy, sorry. Okay, here they're telling you basically what are going to be the physiological responses to fear. Okay, and as you see there. Now, then after that, what you just saw here is actually what they're going to, how they're going to measure fear. And this is what operational definitions will look like. Okay, then here they're going to form a hypothesis, right, from their observations. They looked around, they're like, hey, let's look at this. And then this is what's going to be their hypothesis. If humans have a physiological reaction to a stimulus, right, something scares them, then they're going to experience an emotion of fear. And that is actually a theory that we will learn about emotions, okay? And then they'll tell you the variables that they're going to be measuring. Okay, so for here, for this instance, the variables they're measuring is the physiological reaction and the fear. Okay, now, next thing they need to do is collect data, and then they're going to measure, right? They're testing what relationship these two variables have in common, which is the physiological response and the fear. So here they notice that if there's a physiological response of their heart rate increases, right? That's how they're going to measure it. And they even tell you how, right? Using a smartwatch. Then the fear is going to, how they're going to collect the data is basically seeing this self-reported rating scale from 1 to 20. And if you look here, right here, this is called a scatter plot, and we'll talk more in depth about this. But this is basically saying that as the more, right, the physiological response increases, the higher the fear gets, right? So it's a good way of kind of showing what we will be learning very, very soon. Okay, so now we go into what's called operational definitions. And operational definitions is, I will say, they always ask for this question, and you need to be able to know how to create one. Okay, and we'll be doing some practices, a lot of practices there. The key thing with operational definitions, and I'll tell you now what you're going to write, this is going to be a new subtopic in your notes. So skip a line after we did all of that scientific method. Then you're going to skip a line, and then I want you to write operational definition as your subtopic. And then we're going to be writing some notes, okay? And I need you to write exactly what I say, please, right? And this is basically where they're going to give a descriptive, um, hold on. Okay, sorry about that. They're just not sure what's going on with this screen that it keeps on just changing the PowerPoints the minute I move my mouse, which anyway. So an operational definition is a detailed statement of the exact procedures, the step by steps that will be used in the research. Okay, so they're going to tell you a step by step procedure, and it has to be super, super precise. And the reason behind that, and that's your next little bullet for operational definition, is that it must be detailed that it so it can be replicated. So every research is all about replication. So make sure to write that every excuse me, every word, right, needs to be detailed so that it could be replicated. All right. Now, they must, next little bullet under operational definition is that each word must be defined. Okay. Very important. And then how are they going to measure? Very, very detailed information. So again, the goal is to be able to repeat it so that they could get the same results. So if I go back to this study that they did here with like the fear, okay, believe it or not, what they did is they kind of gave you a detailed within the hypothesis the operational definition, which is how do I know there's going to be a physiological response? Well, this is how I know and what I'm measuring. Okay, so it has to be detailed. We're actually going to do an experiment in class on chocolate chip cookies, like what makes something a chocolate chip cookie, I'm sorry, chocolate chip in a cookie, right? So it's a little bit more complicated, right? How much is a, we'll talk about that some more, but it really needs to be a detailed explanation of your steps and then how you're going to measure. Okay, so it definitely must be the steps, the procedures, and how detailed, like detailed message of how you're going to write down how you're going to measure. Sorry. Okay. So it is something that is we're going to practice, and it must be observable. I think that's the quickest thing. It must be observable for me to measure. Okay. We'll talk a little bit more in class about that. Now, if I want to do an experiment, as you say here, right? We would have to, and we'll go a little bit more in detail of who's in the control group, who's not. Okay, who's in the experimental group. Okay, and then still under operational definition, I want you to write this word replication first, right? So replication is basically the whole point is in research is that you want a good, and write this down under replication, a good operational definition so then others can replicate the study. Okay, so that's one. So you might want to rewind to get it the definition again or what I was saying. And then we have generalizability is when, and you could write that definition is fine, is that basically that when those findings can be applied to a broader group of people or situations. And usually that's why when you do an experiment or any type of research, you want to get a big sample size from the population. So the more people you have in the sense of representing in your sample, then the more you could generalize this information. So you're going to want to include that in there too, what I just said about the bigger the sample size, the more you can generalize for the population.